Ir morago ugnelė degėlilio, kalėda, kalėda. Ananetro rago kavoliai kalėlilio, kalėda, kalėda. Kalėdų rytų rožėjen žydo lilio, kalėda, kalėda. Sekminių rytų gyvai pasidarė lilio, kalėda, kalėda. Gyvai pasidarė, ežerai užšalo.
So what are your earliest memories of Lithuania?
Well, I lived in Lithuania up to the age of 4, and primarily in the city where I was born, which is Kaunas. And from there I clearly have 3 memories of the 3 important people in my life who took care of me, being my grandmother, my father, and my mother. And with my grandmother, I have a memory of us playing with my colored pencils, but we had this game where we pretended that they were children. My father, I have a memory of him making this little elevator for a small doll I had, and the elevator was made from a bicarbonate of soda box, which was very fancy because it was lined in the shiny silvery paper. And he used to drink this bicarbonate of soda for his stomach ulcer, so we had a lot of those boxes. And of my mother, I have a memory of long walks we used to take, pretty much almost on a daily basis, to a big park, which was called Ąžuolynas, which means the oak grove. And she always told me stories of these 2 little elves that lived in one of the hollows of one of the trees. And when I was already like a teenager, I once asked her, did we have a book about these 2 elves? I'd love to see if I could find one. And she said, oh, no, those were just stories I created. And I so wish that we had like a tape recorder of those stories.
So why did you leave Lithuania then?
Well, the Soviets first occupied Lithuania from 1940 to 41, and we avoided actually deportation to Siberia during that time. My father was a career military officer, so he'd be somebody that they would have been hunting. And we actually were saved from that by the Nazi occupation, because when they came, the Soviets left. So when they were coming back, and ahead of the second occupation in 1944, my father had the foresight of sending us, that's me, my mother, and my grandmother, out of the country. And he still stayed back with the regiment.
Where did you go when you left?
Well, the idea was to go west because the Russians were coming in from the east. And so we sort of covered the northwest corner of Poland, what is now the Czech Republic, but at that time that was occupied by Germany, and it was called the Sudetenland. There my mother worked actually in a textile factory. It was sort of like forced labor. She was taken in to work there. And at that point, we, quite by miracle or luck, reconnected with my father, who had by then left Lithuania. And so he came for us, and then we ended up, because the Russian front was advancing again, we ended up in the southern part of Germany, Bavaria, which eventually became the American zone when they partitioned Germany. And there, the United Nations Relief Services set up these displaced persons camps. So we ended up in the town called Kempten in a displaced persons camp.
So what was it like to live in a displaced persons camp in Germany?
Well, the United Nations set up these camps with a rather intelligent system, I'd say. Whenever possible, they set them up by nationality. We lived in a very large Lithuanian DP camp, displaced persons, they were called DPs, in Kempten, in Bavaria, as I mentioned. And because the camp was, there were like 1,200 Lithuanians living there, it was actually a microcosm of the nation, because we were all political refugees, so people of all walks of life had emigrated. So we had, people from shoemakers and seamstresses right up through the bishop, and everybody in between, college professors and doctors and school teachers and nurses, everybody, and military people, my father had been. So camp life was set up like a sort of a mini Lithuania. We had our own schools. They actually printed newspapers. They set up Boy Scout, Girl Scout organizations. They set up choirs, and we even staged plays, and would you believe it, even an opera. Now we're thinking with very meager resources. So the staging was, pretty limited. But we sort of tried to make life as normal as possible. But the facilities we lived in were wherever they could house that many people. I mean, the Lithuanian camp had about 1,200 inhabitants. So we were in a building that was attached to a big church. And you were lucky if you got a room to yourself for your entire family. Our particular situation was initially we actually lived on a stair landing, and they cut off the stair traffic with a kind of a bunch of armoires or schifferols that the Germans provided. And but you could hear the noise all day and all night. It was not a pleasant existence. Then we were assigned to a room, and that room we had to share with another family, and that family had 2 teenage kids, and I remember that they were forever fighting, not just the kids, the parents too, and we could hear every word of it. And we lived there for way over a year. And finally we got a room to ourselves, just for the 4 of us, my mother, father, grandmother, and me. We slept in that room, we cooked in that room, we ate in that room. By the way, these places did not have like private bath facilities. We had bathrooms down the hall, and for bathing there was a very large shower room, which was, the water was heated once a week for women and once a week for men, and there were no stalls, and you all just went there into this room to shower. So privacy was kind of an issue. But for kids are very resilient. We had fun. I mean, we had the school, we built snow men, we had snowball fights in the wintertime. You went outside and there were always kids there, so you had lots of friends. For adults, of course, it was a totally abnormal life from the one that they had led. I actually have my 4th grade history book from DP school, and these books were printed on this rotary printer through a stencil, not very high quality, and we didn't have enough of them to go around. So, for example, 2 and sometimes 3 kids had to share a book. So you take one home, you do your homework, and an hour later some kid would come down from a couple rooms over, because remember we lived in this big room, this big place with rooms, and they would pick it up and go do their homework, and if there was a 3rd kid, then he'd have to get it. But we learned.
Did you have contact with your family in Lithuania, or any way to communicate with them?
No, for almost 5 years we never knew anything about the family that was left behind. But then, strangely enough, when we were emigrating already to the United States, we were in a transitional camp, and this letter arrived from an ex-German soldier who had been taken prisoner of war by the Soviets and was in Soviet territory. He worked in a factory where my cousin also worked. And my cousin was a young man then, he must have been like 18 or 19 years old. He made friends with this German, and then the German prisoners of war were being repatriated back to Germany in a sort of an exchange program. Soviets were getting their prisoners of war back, and they were sending the Germans back. And my cousin wrote a letter